A few months ago now, I finished watching the highly recommended Disney animated TV series Rapunzel's Tangled Adventures. Honestly, coming into it, I wasn't expecting to like it so much. In fact, it actually took some persistence for me to keep going with it. Once I did though, I was hooked, and this led me down the rabbit hole of Tangled lore and character discussion I had no idea existed. This then led me to offer some opinions of my own, and these are ones that I largely stand by. However, a little while ago, I was watching a YouTube channel I particularly enjoy, Cinema Therapy, where they break down characters and relationships from an in-depth emotional perspective. The video that got me thinking was one where they were analysing the behaviour of Jenny from Forrest Gump, in particular due to internet discourse saying she was toxic for Forrest and was the true villain of the movie. I had made a video not too long before about Rapunzel from the TV show and my analysis over whether her behaviours were toxic within the story. Long story short, I basically said she had some toxic behaviours and choices, but she wasn't as bad as some of the other characters. Today, I want to reanalyze all of this within the new light Cinema Therapy's kindly shone onto the world, and take another look as to whether my take was a fair one. First of all, we'll have to actually define what makes somebody or a relationship toxic. I'm simply going to reference the actual definition used by Cinema Therapy, which has an actual licensed therapist on the channel. Toxic is defined by the Oxford Dictionary as poisonous, harmful, or unpleasant in a pervasive or insidious way. It's a pretty serious word to be throwing around and labelling characters with, and one that feels pretty severe against the so-called Sunshine Princess. I may not have initially treated the word toxic with the weight it deserves, but today I will endeavour to do so. I suppose before we get started, I'll go through a general overview of plot threads through the movie, but in particular the TV show, that Rapunzel's been a part of, and then we'll dive into her actions and relationships and examine from there. In the film Tangled, we meet Rapunzel, the crown princess of the Kingdom Corona. She's kidnapped as a baby due to having special flower powers that keep her adoptive kidnapper eternally youthful. She's unaware of all of this and is kept captive under the pretense of parental love and safety until one day, a criminal rogue breaks into her tower and makes a deal with Rapunzel to go on a quick excursion in exchange for a tiara he stole. Shenanigans ensue, they begin to fall in love, Rapunzel's enjoying her freedom, he goes to give the tiara to some other bandits, they made a backroom deal with the adoptive mum so he can't make his way back to her, she goes back home, figures out all the secrets and confronts her mum. Eugene breaks back in to save her but he gets stabbed, her mum dies and Rapunzel heals Eugene. They make their way back to the kingdom where she reunites with her biological parents and they all live happily ever after. Until the TV show. The premise of the TV show begins 6 months after her return to the kingdom. She's about to be coronated, but is feeling penned in by all the responsibilities and wants to be able to spread her wings and have adventures. Makes sense, given her 18 years in captivity. Unfortunately, there's a lot of pressure on her, so she sneaks out, touches some mystical rocks, her magical hair grows back, and we enter into adventure mode. Throughout Season 1, she meets a lot of people within the kingdom, doing small side quests, adventures, and such, whilst keeping a slight focus on the mystical rocks that are spreading closer and closer to Corona. In Season 2, they break through the kingdom wall and follow the rock trail into the unknown. The group discover that the rocks are connected to the Sundrop Flower through a Moonstone Opal, which if rejoined can awaken some ancient power. There's a major betrayal by one of Rapunzel's closest allies, and Season 3 pretty much revolves all around that, and some demon that wants to return to take over the kingdom. Rapunzel wins of course, and then actually lives happily ever after. The end. Obviously, that's majorly simplifying things, and on face value, you're not really going to be able to analyse too much based on that brief description. However, I do largely remember the character interactions, and Wikipedia has always been my friend, so we'll be able to talk specifics. So I think the next best step is to lay out the grievances or critiques fans seem to have of Rapunzel and what they believe is the evidence, so to speak, that labels her as a toxic person. Overall, there are 4 real main critiques I believe that are levelled at Rapunzel. The first 2 involve her personality, her positive demeanour, and her belief that she's always right. The second 2 involve her interactions with the characters of Varan and Cassandra. Then we'll come to the conclusion whether these facets of her personality or her behaviours with these characters deem her a toxic person. Now that's all laid out, I suppose I'd better get started. Okay, critique number 1, her positivity. Over the course of the film and the TV show, it's clear that Rapunzel is an optimist. She looks for the good in others and the enjoyment in life, no matter how mundane it may appear. Her kindness and eagerness to connect with others is paramount to her personality. I think most would view these virtues as good traits to possess. Having the desire to care for and interact with others in a positive way could hardly be viewed as a negative. I do realise there's a case to be made for too much positivity could be used to drown out serious negative feelings such as boundaries. I would also say that there are cases where Rapunzel does do this. In an effort to be accommodating and wishing to connect with others, her eager personality can be used to drown out other voices that may be serious in their opinion. For example, there's an instance within the show where Cassandra's beginning a relationship and Rapunzel wants to share in the joy for her friend. However, Cassandra doesn't want a big fuss made, and Rapunzel just views her negative reaction as shyness, and so persists in her desire to share this experience. Now, whilst Cassandra is well within her right to not want to share this relationship with the world, and her wishes should be respected, Rapunzel's behaviour doesn't just make her toxic. Toxic is defined as poisonous behaviour with malicious or insidious intent. Rapunzel's behaviour, whilst unhealthy and needing to be addressed, which actually is within the context of this problem, is not insidious. It's conducted with the intention of support and love, not in a way to harm Cassandra. And the fact that she acknowledges where she went wrong and that she needs to respect Cassandra's boundaries proves it. A toxic person wouldn't accept this, and they certainly wouldn't be doing it to share the joy. The level of positivity where it could be overbearing and where Rapunzel learns from this remains largely the status quo for the first 2 seasons. However, where I do believe this critique has some merit is in her persistence to save Cassandra at all costs during season 3. Once Cassandra turns evil, Rapunzel shell-shocked. This person that she believed to be her close friend and ally completely rejects her and vows vengeance. Now, whether we define her behaviour as a relentless positive belief that she can win back Cassandra's friendship, or guilt over the way that things played out of their shared connection to Mother Gothel, the problem still arises. Rapunzel continuously neglects or pushes away the advice of others that Cassandra refuses to change, and thus puts the other people she cares for and loves in danger. This behaviour, whilst harmful, isn't conducted insidiously though. In fact, she does listen and is ready to take on the advice only for other accidents to get in the way and ruin their plans. Her behaviour, whilst obviously unhealthy, isn't inherently toxic. Yes, she struggles with the advice, but she's not deaf to it. Rapunzel considers what others tell her, and whilst we the audience can't understand why it takes her so long to heed it, she doesn't outright refuse it. She genuinely believes that she can stop her by force and win without hurting her, and so she wishes for her heart to change. If she were to let Cassandra completely take control of the kingdom and hurt others without a fight because she cares too much to stop her, that would be toxic and detrimental to her fault. However, this isn't the case, and so whilst I disagree with her methods, her behaviour doesn't make her a toxic person. The second critique revolves around her always being right. Now, as a basis, you're going to find your main character is often going to be right in the end. Yes, they're going to learn from mistakes, but by and large their heart will be in the right place, and they're going to fight for justice. In the end, they're going to be right more often than not. As for Rapunzel, she's a main character that is sweeter than most. Her endless positivity and kindness rivals many a Disney princess, who are all really meant to be the epitome of good values. If the princess that's renowned for being kind and loving isn't often right, I feel like there's going to be a conflict of interest in your storytelling. That being said, I can understand where people are coming from, and I think I know of a few storylines that they're basing this argument on. Before we get to that though, which begins really in season 2, I will say that there are many storylines where Rapunzel actively has to learn that her way is not always the best way. Even if she means well, there are always lessons to be learned, and she in fact does learn them. Her core remains the same, but previous storylines are actively referenced that she's had to come to terms with, e.g. Monty's irrational hatred of her. Coming into season 2, there's other lessons that Rapunzel continues to learn about her friends and boundaries, but notably, there's a disconnect growing between Cassandra and Rapunzel that leads up to Cass's betrayal at the end of the season. In the Great Tree arc, Cass and Rapunzel are in major conflict of how to move forward. Cassandra doesn't trust their new tag-along Adira, but Rapunzel feels like they should. They have no concrete evidence at this point that Adira is acting against them, and so it's really just a case of differing opinions. This all comes to a head where Rapunzel once again disagrees with Cass about how they should escape, and Cass gets injured by Rapunzel. This is the point of no return, really, and the mark where everybody points at Rapunzel for being stubborn and steadfast in her opinions to the detriment of her friend. Now, I'm actually going to push back on this one quite a bit, as it doesn't really make much sense to me. From the beginning of season 2, it's been abundantly clear that Rapunzel's hair is connected to these mysterious rocks, and it's acknowledged by their whole team that this is her journey and her destiny. They're here to support her. They can offer advice and help, but ultimately she's the one calling the shots. In this particular arc, Cass and Rapunzel butt heads quite a bit because Rapunzel's opinion differs from Cass. Since Rapunzel is following her own opinion, this is taken as her assumption that she's right to the detriment of others, and thus is toxic. I don't agree with this. Like I just stated, this is Rapunzel's mission. It isn't toxic for her to disagree with her friend and to choose a different path. She is the leader. This is her mission. She gets the final say. Not only that, but she continues to reach out to Cass and let her know that she understands her opinions come from a good place, and she wants no ill will between them. She doesn't scold her or isolate her, she just doesn't agree. As for the injury, yes, she goes against Cassandra's opinion and takes a different one, but she tells Cass to leave. She doesn't make her touch her. Plus, Rapunzel warns her of the danger, that she can't stop this dangerous power that she's using. Yes, it's obviously devastating that her arm's badly wounded, but it wasn't her fault. I can't understand how she's blamed for this completely. Cass is perfectly within her rights to feel rejected and sad about Rapunzel not listening, but she should still have to respect her wishes, just like Rapunzel should respect hers. There's also an episode in Season 3 that people reference when talking about Rapunzel's desire to always be right. She discovers that Cass's belongings are being moved out of her room since the whole betrayal fiasco, and she accidentally comes across a time-travelling hourglass. Rapunzel and Pascal get transported back in time and come across a teenage Eugene and Lance. Throughout the episode, Lance gets caught by the royal guards, and Rapunzel convinces Eugene that a friend shouldn't be left behind, playing into their earlier argument about Cass's betrayal. Ultimately, they succeed, Rapunzel ends back in her timeline, and Eugene understands her point of view, returning Cass's possessions. This episode is framed amongst some fans as some insidious, intentional mission by Rapunzel to go back in time and change his mind. Have they watched the episode though? All of this happens by accident. She didn't know what the hourglass did, and she only enlists their help to get the hourglass in their timeline so she can go back home. She has no intention of changing Eugene's mind about the whole Cass situation here. The only way she accomplishes that is because she tells him how much Lance means to him once he gets captured and says that they should go back for him. After this, she goes back to her own timeline, and Eugene's had time to think and understand her perspective. The whole notion of this episode is for Eugene to gain some understanding as to why she doesn't want to give up on Cass, which he does because it's put into context of his friendship with Lance. It's obviously not exactly the same because Lance didn't betray him, but the concept's there. Also, just because Eugene's returning Cass's things doesn't mean he's conceding and ignoring Cass's betrayal. He's just understanding that Cass is important to Rapunzel and that they can at least try. And this is followed up with in subsequent episodes. How this makes Rapunzel a toxic person beats me. I recognise, however, that in Season 3, Rapunzel does ignore a lot of advice, more so than in previous seasons, with some pretty hefty consequences. Cass, along with Zantiri, do some pretty heinous stuff and put a lot of people in danger. I agree that Rapunzel's largely against the majority opinion that Cass needs to be dealt with as a criminal and is justified by the storyline. To me, this is just poor writing in general, but I still can't accept that this makes her a toxic character or person. We've previously referenced that she acknowledges Cass needs to be dealt with. This happens in the episode Once a Handmaiden, where while she's convinced she can talk Cassandra down, she still signs a document that allows the guards to attack her if she attacked Corona and its citizens. Please, will someone enlighten me how this is harmful in an insidious way? She's meeting in the middle while she's still strengthened in her convictions. Obviously, she's blinded by love and faith in her friend, however misguided and wrong she may be, but she's not an idiot. She isn't willing to put her people in danger, and so she signs a contract condoning their use of weapons against Cass. Yes, she let things get bad, and that isn't good, but it's not unreasonable either. She also doesn't lie down in front of Cass and concede. She's willing to fight her, as we see in the finale. I don't see how these are the actions of someone who's so self-assured and is always right, because if she was always right, she wouldn't have need to fought her to begin with. She forgives her, and sets Cassandra free, but Cassandra still betrays her and fights her until she loses her powers to Zantiri. So in the end, Rapunzel's actually proven wrong, but her kindness and love shine through anyway. I don't really like this ending, but it doesn't align with the notion that Rapunzel's toxic. The only argument I can even think of is the fate of Cass at the end of the series, i.e., her leaving to go wander the world. It could be argued that it's very neglectful and negligent for the royal family to even let Cassandra go free. But for one, she did lose her powers, and there's no way those are coming back, so she doesn't pose much of a threat. But also, she may well have been exiled. It's never stated, but I wouldn't put it past that royal family. Specifically that king. Either way, that's probably the most toxic behaviour I could think of. But then again, like I said, if they were willing to fight her then, if she came back evil, I reckon they'd battle her again. Next, we come to the neglect of Cass and Varan. We'll start with Varan. I'll be real with you, Rapunzel did nothing wrong in the lead up to Varian's turn to villainy. Yes, she broke her promise, but circumstances had changed so much. There was literally a natural disaster occurring, and she had to not only keep her kingdom safe, but find a way to rescue the actual heads of state, the king and queen. If the deputy leader of some country is faced with a catastrophic natural disaster, and they had to enact a dangerous rescue attempt for said leader, do you really think the public would be all too happy for them running off to help some random civilian because of their own mistake, simply because of a prior commitment that had been made? I don't think so. However, I do think it's very weird that Rapunzel never goes to check in on Varan afterwards. This is a poor choice, considering he is her friend and he came to her for help, but I don't think it's inherently toxic. I think it's more terrible writing, but we've discussed that already. Simply because it's so wildly out of character. Regardless, Rapunzel's behaviour does not cause Varan to become a villain. He's not actually a victim here. He makes his choice and he acknowledges that in the third season. Whilst Rapunzel doesn't really acknowledge the fact that she should have been there for him after the storm cleared, I do think it's fair that she does let him go free after he joins their side once more. I mean, the dude did kidnap the queen, so you'd think there'd be a heavier sentence than a 1-year imprisonment, but in the end she lets him go, and she even helps him make new connections and not simply be the guy that betrayed Corona. So whilst her behaviour is poor for not following up on her friend, I don't think it's fully toxic. Lastly, we come to her neglect of Casss. We've already covered this a bit in the video, but here we're going to talk more about their dynamic and the supposed disregard she has for her wishes. There's 3 main examples I can think of that we haven't covered already. The first is when she told Eugene the truth about what happened with her hair and the rocks. In arguments against Rapunzel, this is a supposed gotcha moment that she's a terrible friend and doesn't listen to Casss. I don't know about you, but when I watched it, I remember Casss inviting Rapunzel to escape without forewarning any of the consequences she might personally face if caught. Rapunzel enters into this agreement under Cass's suggestion, chaos ensues, and then she's guilted into not telling her significant other because, oh dear, the consequences of my actions. I'm sorry, how does this make Rapunzel the bad guy? If you don't agree to keep this secret I'm forcing on you without any prior knowledge, you're the bad guy. I'm not saying that Casss wouldn't have the right to be upset and worried, and she doesn't have to trust or even like Eugene, but she does have to understand that Rapunzel has to make her own choices, and she has to live with that. Seems to be a theme, to be honest. Secondly, there's that contest Rapunzel is excited to enter into, unknowing that Casss wants some glory for herself and simply wants to join in. Now, once again, Cass is right to be upset and feel like she's going to be outshone by Rapunzel. Feelings of envy or jealousy can be completely normal, but you can't stop somebody doing something simply because you want it. How childish is that? Rapunzel wasn't even told until later on, and yes, whilst Cass is displaying her negativity and trying to negate Rapunzel entering, that shouldn't stop her. Then she uses her telling Eugene about the whole sneaking out as the reason she couldn't trust her. Jesus. I'm not saying that she has to trust Rapunzel, and I acknowledge that Rapunzel can be overbearing and she, meaning Rapunzel, needs to recognize and work on that. But how's she supposed to if you don't give her the chance? It's not Cass's responsibility to shape Rapunzel, I'll grant you, but either accept who she is and be professional about it, or be her friend and tell her come what may. I see it argued that Rapunzel has all this privilege and adoration that's thrust upon her, and whilst that's true, is she just supposed to stay in her box forever then? What about Cassandra's privilege as the daughter of the captain of the royal guard? What about that clear nepotism that she got her role as the handmaiden to the princess because of that connection? The whole concept at the beginning of the show is that Rapunzel doesn't want to be confined into the princess role and wants to experience the world. Cassandra's seemingly all aboard until it negatively impacts her slightly. Obviously, they make up at the end with Cassandra conceding that Rapunzel deserves some fun, whilst Rapunzel learns that Cassandra deserves her opportunity to be in the spotlight too. You know, good morals all around. But this is somehow Rapunzel being toxic, which I think is disingenuous and taking things completely at face value with no context or nuance. There are other instances of supposed neglect of Casss by Rapunzel. Things which we've covered already, like Rapunzel having a different opinion and following through on that, like with the Great Tree. Another example in Season 2 is the bird situation, where Rapunzel doesn't listen to Cass's advice, and so they're threatened with the possibility of all being turned into real birds forever. You know, that episode where Rapunzel admits that she was wrong, apologizes, and even makes the ultimate sacrifice herself. Yeah, that one. Whilst Rapunzel makes mistakes and goes against Cassandra sometimes for good or bad, I think the show largely covers where she gets it right and where she should apologize. If Rapunzel was perfect, she'd be called a Mary Sue, which I no doubt suspect she already is called, but this version of her is flawed. And it shows that despite her best intentions, she can be oblivious, selfish, and loyal to a fault. She may make mistakes with her friends in terms of support or disagreement, but these are largely acknowledged and moved on from. These are arcs to overcome, and they contribute to the story. I think it also helps to understand that everybody is right in their own way. Varan was right to feel betrayed and hurt. It's rational for Casss to feel overstepped by Rapunzel. Rapunzel's desire to have fun and spread love amongst her friends after being locked up in a tower isolated for the first 18 years of her life makes a lot of sense. Her learning that people aren't rejecting her because they feel uncertain or unloved like she was made to feel is a good arc. Her overstepping, trying to change the way that she treats Cassandra after Varan, is a good arc. Arguing that Rapunzel comes from a life of privilege and has had everything handed to her on a silver platter, yet she's so utterly selfish, is wild to me. I'm not saying that Rapunzel's perfect. I don't think they got her whole story right, but her behaviour, whilst at times unhealthy and somewhat dysfunctional, isn't coming from an insidious or deliberate place. She attempts to learn and understand and change. That to me proves she's not toxic. You can acknowledge that you disagree without putting such a harsh label on it. And while she is a fictional character and it technically doesn't matter, where would we be if we never take this word seriously? With all that being said though, these have just been my opinions and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of Rapunzel? Do you think she's toxic? Have I changed your mind? Do you have a different opinion? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment and subscribe and let me know.